Hi, it's Brad Saunders, CEO at Community Living Toronto, and welcome to this episode of Community Chats. International Women's Day is on March 8th, and Community Living Toronto will be recognizing our female workforce and their allies across the organization to celebrate, learn, and get to know each other. The gathering is led by our Women's Inclusion Network, which is one of Community Living Toronto's employee resource groups. In this community chat, I talk with Mita Hans and Deanna Strazzella for a conversation about their role as leaders with Community Living Toronto, their professional journeys, and how that intersects with their personal lives. Both have fascinating stories. They both bring an interesting background and perspective that has helped me better understand their past and current experiences as women navigating the workplace and their perspectives on both caregiving and care providing. It was a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy. Deanna and Mita, thanks for joining us today to talk about some of the issues related to the roles that you both play in celebration of International Women's Day.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Going to start off by asking you each to introduce yourselves, maybe a little bit about how you got into this field and a bit of your background. So, Mita, why don't I start with you?
International Women's Day is a time of reflection for me, in that it was sort of an impetus for me to make a very large journey in my life when I came out to my parents. And I came from a traditional Punjabi family, and it didn't go over so well. And they said, you either stay and follow traditional rules, cultural rules, or you leave. And I was young and very, very headstrong. And in that regard, nothing has changed. So I left, and I found myself jobless, alone, and without family. And the first job that came to me was in caregiving. And I thought, this is something that spoke to me. And it was at International Women's Day where they were talking about women's jobs. And that's how I ended up at Community Living in 1991, I think it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a journey.
That's how I started.
Excellent. Deanna, what about yourself?
That's a tough one to follow. 1991, so I was 3, or maybe 2. So you got me well beat there, Mita. So I'm trying to think. So the question was, sorry, just repeat the question.
Yeah, just introduce yourself.
Okay.
Tell us who you are.
So I'm Deanna. I obviously work for Community Living. I'm the Senior Director of Specialized Services at Community Living. How I came to be with Community Living. So I did my undergrad in psychology. I did a postgrad in behavioral analysis, and I was lucky enough to have 3 different placements with my postgrad. And the first one I did in a school, the second one I did in an IBI center, and then the third one I did in a group home that was supporting children with very severe autism. And after my first 2 placements, I was like, I don't know if this is for me. I remember sitting in a chair at an IBI center, just kind of like head bobbing and looking up and being like, wow, it's 3:00. This has been the longest day of my life. And just every day was like that, feeling like, wow, I don't know that this is for me. And when I walked into this group home for children, and I'll never forget it, it was my first day, walked in, and one of the individuals that was being supported was really escalated. Like, a chair had been thrown, a TV was pulled off the wall, staff were kind of running in all directions. And I was like, yes, this is for me.
This is for me.
Time is not gonna pass slowly here. There was just this real sense of teamwork and problem solving and critical thinking and all of these things that were happening, that I was like, I can see myself in this sort of fast-paced environment, working with a close-knit team. And I loved it. I loved it from the minute I walked in on my very first shift as a student, and I was very fortunate to then get hired at that role. And then the home that I worked at was acquired by Community Living,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I've never left. And that's just how it came to be. I've been with Community Living for almost 15 years now. I think it's 13, 14 years in May. And it has been a really amazing journey that I've really enjoyed, and I'm excited to talk about today.
Yeah, that's good. So let's. It's interesting. You've both been here for quite a long time, and I'm curious. So there's a couple things. One, you're both in caregiving fields, and it just I use the language that I picked up from the Canadian Center on Caregiving Excellence around the caring fields, right? So many of us are caregivers, right? And that's sort of the natural things that you have. You're a parent. You're a son. You're taking care of parents. You've got natural roles in your life that we're all fulfilling that get more or less challenging throughout your life, right? If your parents are aging or when you have young kids, and then care providing is when you're a professional person, like it's your job that you're paid to provide a service, whether it's PSW or in our case, you're working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or on the autism spectrum. So, and as it relates to International Women's Day, many women, and it pains me to say this as a guy, but I accept it to be true. Women often carry a lot of the burden around caregiving, but also when you're in a role of care providing, you can't really say I gave at the office because you're picking up a lot at home too. So with that context, how have you found your roles at Community Living Toronto or just in the care providing sector? How have you found that, or what's your experience been? How do you survive that? How do you thrive? Mita, I'll start with you.
So I think the care provider moniker is very much, there's a class distinction inherent in it, in that care providers can be doctors. That professional designation is embedded in the language, whereas caregiver, there's an assumption, and there's also a pay scale and a class privilege that comes from being able to divide the two. That caregiving can't be divided in our sector into care providing because we don't have that luxury of hiring external when we need it.
Right.
So it's a constant. And I think navigating it is, it's very much like gender, that it's not who we, what we are, what we do, it's who we are. So inherent in the role is, this is a job, this is a thing, but more than that, it's who we are. So inside it, outside of it, in our home life, in our work life, this is who we are, and this is how we present authentically in all of those environments. So I just wanted to make that distinction between the two.
So just to drill into that a little bit, so you would say at your core, you're a caregiving, you're a carer. You care like that. That's what you're passionate about. So it's your professional life, but then I assume you've got personal relationships too, where you're caring as well. So it really is a thread. How did you come into that role? Was there a moment where you just went, this is what I love, this is what I want to do? Or was there a realization there, or was it, this is what I can do, and then you've grown to love it?
I think for me, it stemmed from leaving Idi Amin, Uganda. And we were at the first end of the trains that left there. And we were able to escape to a neutral country and have shelter. But some of the later trains of people that came, the people had been hurt very badly. They were naked, they were beaten, they were forced into the train. So we were at the receiving end of them at the train station, with blankets and food and bringing them into our home. And they lived with us for a few months. And those are some of my earliest memories of just, it's a life and death thing, that our existence depends in a second on somebody's ability to care for us.
Right.
that can be taken away at any moment. And if we don't have that connection where we're constantly looking after each other, it can turn real bad real soon. And I think having that embedded at such a young age, because that was a formative memory,
Yeah.
it very much turned into me looking out for community
So
all the time.
that's it. So so the expulsion from Uganda by Idi Amin, I don't know a lot about this. So, but basically, he expelled Indians that had come from, and you had mentioned your background is Punjabi. So you were part of that group where he said we don't want Indians in this country anymore because there
Yeah.
was, I mean, and that would have been in the 70s when that
Mhm.
happened.
Yeah, early 70s.
Okay, so even from that age, you noticed, so you would have been a young girl at the time, noticing people on the train that were suffering, and your heart went out to them. So it's almost like from that early age, you had that in you.
Yeah, and then it continues. I mean, if you look at the States right now with what's happening with immigration, there's always a group that's been othered,
Yeah,
whether it
yeah,
was the Irish, it was the Portuguese, it was the Jamaicans, it was the Vietnamese boat people, whoever it is, there's always a group of somebody that's being othered. And I think my instinctive response is always to see who the other is and how to make them family.
yeah. No, that's how I was good. I've had a number of conversations with people about that period of history and that event, but I've never actually met somebody. I didn't know that about you, that you had been through that, where you're part of a country and all of a sudden you're not part of that country, and in a
Yeah.
very dramatic way. That's remarkable. Um, Deanna, I'm assuming you didn't have you didn't have a similar experience. But what's your
It's a tough
context for that?
act following up Mita
I
for all
know,
these
meat is
questions.
tough. uh, what was your experience with coming into this sector and feeling like it was where you want to be? I mean, I know you touched on it, but
Yeah.
what
And
what was that
I
like?
don't know if this is going to be like cool to say in this talk, but I don't know that I would have identified myself as a caregiver, before coming into this sector. I don't think that that's
Yep.
something that really would have. And I also came into this sector by accident, and then came to love it once
Yeah.
I was here. So for me, when I started in the behavioral science program, I wasn't even really sure what I wanted to do yet. I had taken psychology, I had taken behavioral science, and then they gave this opportunity to do these placements. And I came to learn about it and I came to love it. So I didn't come into it with that same experience, Mita, where I was like, I need to get into this like caregiving type of profession, or I felt it in my bones, which probably sounds kind of almost maybe a little
No, well,
anti-woman
just to
at the
push
same
back a
time.
little, gently, you didn't take
Yeah.
a degree in geography, right? You went
No,
into
fair.
psychology,
Yeah.
which is inherent around you're going to work with people
Yeah.
and understand how the mind works, right?
Yeah. But
So
if
yeah, yeah,
to be honest, when I first got in, I think I was thinking more like CSI, forensics, and hot, like the polar
right,
opposite of
yeah, yeah,
but obviously it, did touch on something inherent within me, because when I got into it, then I loved it, and then I stayed here for a number of different reasons. But um, yeah, I think I recently became a mom, and I think that has also changed my how I connect with my work pretty significantly. My daughter just turned 2. I took one of the world's longest mat leaves and really got to enjoy that experience with her. And I wasn't sure what it was going to be like coming back to work. And coming back to work after having a daughter, I had a lot of, and sorry not to go off on too many tangents here, but before
that's fine.
it took, and this is probably going to be TMI and sharing too much information, but it took me a really long time to have a baby. We
Yeah,
tried for many, many years. Um, and while I was going through that, I was really like worried about people knowing that I was going through IVF. I was trying to have a baby. I didn't want people in leadership positions to know. I was worried that it might impact my ability to take on higher positions. Like there was all this fear around
yeah,
it for me, and whether that was real or imposed, or I don't like it, there was just a lot going on there. And then I had Remy and I came back to work, and I don't know if I imposed some of these things on myself, but after having Remy, I am exponentially better at my job. I just am, I'm more empathetic, I'm more understanding, I'm more compassionate. I have this whole other side of me that I'm like, wow, I have just connected to in a way that I wouldn't have thought possible. And I don't know why I was so scared and thought it was like this horrible thing about me having a baby. And I think there's probably a lot to unpack there from like a leadership perspective, women in leadership, etc. But that has made me really, I think, connect more to seeing myself as like
Okay.
a caregiver or in a caregiving profession. Obviously, I knew that because we work with community living, but I don't know that I would have identified myself that way before
Okay.
now.
Now I should say with Remy, she's got a great birthday, right?
Yes, yes. Only
Like,
shares with the best.
um, Deanna's daughter and I share the same birthday, so that's I also have a dog that shares the same birthday with me, but that's
Oh,
not the same. That's not the same. So no, but I think you've touched on so that piece. Or what was it about that? And Mita, I'd like your thoughts on this too. When you come into the workforce, and again, International Women's Day, we're in a sector that is it's predominantly women tend to be in our sector or in a lot of the caregiving, care providing kind of professions. There's a lot of, well, I'm in this sector too, and I've been for my whole career, and there's lots of men that do this work as well, but it seems to be seen often as work that women do, and that they're better suited for. And you talked, Deanna, about coming in and not being able to be your full self, not being able to be present. So you had to sort of segment stuff. And Mita, I'm sure you've had sort of feelings there in the workforce context. What's that like? Why is that? Why would you feel that? Because it sounds like, Deanna, it was more than just you being private, but it was that you were worried about consequences if you were your full self at work. And before you answer, I'll go to Mita just to get. Did you have a similar experience, or how have you experienced that in your career?
If we think that it's predominantly women now, it was much, much, much more so in the 90s when I entered this field. Men were so few and far between. You could count the men in the agency, like literally count them
Yeah.
and say, this is the, 1 dozen men that I know who work for community living. And they were in higher up positions. They were predominantly in corporate and not on frontline. There were very distinct roles for the men. And when I look at it now, I'm thinking it was so archaic, and it wasn't that long ago. I'm not that old,
Yeah.
and that this was the norm. It's changed significantly. I'm seeing more and more men on the front line, more and more men comfortable being on the front line and acknowledging that they don't need to make that hierarchical difference in order to make a difference in the broader field, and that making a difference becomes the focus rather than assessing where their differences lay. That
Right.
this is not a man's job, this is a woman's job, and it's not so much so anymore. And I'm really liking that. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's definitely changing.
Yeah. Deanna, what's your perspective on women in the
yeah.
sector or women in the organization?
I think so. The last time that I reported to a woman was, I'm trying to think that. I think when I first started with community living.
Okay.
So at Buttonwood was when I
Okay.
last, and I think to Mita's point about it being, there are more men now sort of working frontline, and that's really good. I think I'm seeing and experiencing that too. But agree with, and I think our senior leadership team has become probably more diverse, has more women. But going back, I guess, a little bit to my experience, I've only reported to men for the last like 10, 12 years. And I don't know if that's just luck or it speaks to the composition of like our leadership team, but in going back to some of that previous conversation about how I think, what influenced some of the thinking and things there, that has been my sort of experience. I'm hopeful about the fact that more men are getting into the frontline sort of components of work, et cetera. I think that that's really good. I'm glad, Mita, that you've noticed that difference.
Well, I really noticed it when doing the EDI stuff. One of the first things when I was looking at through the portfolio was that Brad's signature on the 50-30 challenge that Trudeau had put out, that of making sure that 50% of leadership is women. And when I saw community living as a signatory, that just made my day.
Oh.
It made me very much feel like I was in the right place.
And that's good to hear. And because you sometimes lose track of how important some of those actions are, some of those, pursuing those things that you're trying to make your best shot at achieving them. And I hope we get there. And Deanna, it's interesting that you said you can't remember the last time you reported to a woman. Most of my career, the people I've reported to have been women, right? And then I remember in my 30s, I'd be at planning tables or meetings or whatever, and I would be the only guy there. And so I don't know what that says about me, but I never, it wasn't like I would walk in and notice it, but at some point you think, man, there's no other guys here. So, it's an interesting, I guess the diversity is good. And the fact that we seem to be, are we agreeing that it's better than it used to be, and we're on a right track in
I
generally?
think so.
Okay.
I think so. I think the reason because you asked about being able to bring your whole self or showing up with your whole self to work. And I was just reflecting on that. And even just with my experience, and thinking, because you had asked you felt the need to kind of keep some things private, et cetera. And I was like, well, yeah, I was reporting to one man after another, and not to say that people can't, and that sort of the
and I didn't make that connection. I wasn't thinking that. That's okay. Okay.
And it's not to say that men can't empathize and understand, but I think for me at that time, that was my big concern was okay, if you find out I'm going to be wanting to have a baby, do you think I'm going to want to have 5 babies? Do you think maybe I can't take on a promotion? Can't do this, can't do that. And again, that was my point about maybe that's all self-imposed. Maybe I should have taken a chance and had the conversations, and I would have maybe felt I could share more, or it would have been more comfortable. I don't know. But for me, that was part of that.
Okay. Yeah. I want to come around to it's an interesting time, and it's interesting. We're living in Canada, and it certainly feels Canadian outside. It's cold and snowy and the whole bit. And then Canadians tend to contrast themselves with what's going on in America. And I have a son and a daughter. And I've been so disappointed in the conversations and the sort of examples that are being put out there around what makes a man and what makes a woman. So there is this, sort of stuff coming up culturally where there's a sense that there needs to be a pullback, that we've gone too far, that people have too many rights and freedoms. And I don't know. So I'd be interested in your perspective on what's your experience of that in the Canadian context.
I think that we're very much culturally oriented to our environments and whatever that environment is. And one of the great things about working, I've just gone back to Frontline, which I absolutely love for its diversity, is that it introduces so many different perspectives on the daily, because you have constant staff changes. There's different people coming in for the night shift from the afternoon shift. There's different staff on site. So your day-to-day living of how you eat, how you set the table, all of those kinds of things, those variables that we take for granted aren't going to change in our home environments. On the front line, they're constantly shifting, and they're shifting according to differing cultural norms. And that starts the brain into thinking that maybe what was acceptable in this one thing that I always took as the normal isn't the normal. And it sets us up for being a lot more open-minded. So what I find is that the people we support because they're used to so many different perspectives all the time, don't take in the same elements of media that we are taking for
Right.
granted, and they don't have the same strength and concentration.
Okay, so with you both had a lot of experience in this field, and you know obviously we work in our organization and then within the sector with lots of people that are coming in all the time. And this being, International Women's Day, I don't know that this will be released right on there, but that's what we're sort of talking about. What advice do you have for young women coming into choosing careers, choosing, coming into jobs? Maybe was there an experience that you could share that shaped the way you think about work, whether either positive or negative, or that you would use to give advice to sort of young women that are up and coming and trying to navigate this? You both have a lot of experience, but much different experiences. So what would your advice be for women at coming into the workforce, either ours or others? What wisdom would you share? Deanna, do you want to kick it off?
Sure.
Or what do you wish you had known if you were 20 or 25 or getting into that, and just starting out? What's the one thing you look back on and
Well, the
or
one
maybe
thing that
some
I
of it?
reflect a lot about, and I have a lot of friends who move jobs like quite often, and there's like some benefit in doing that in certain industries. And they always ask me, like, well, how have you stayed at the same company for so long? And I ask myself, like, what are those things about? Like, why am I still here? And there's a few things. So one is that I've been provided a lot of opportunities to do so many different things, and I think a lot of people talk about that when they talk about community living. We're so big, we have all these different areas that you can connect with. So I've had a lot of opportunity to, just do a lot of different things, trial different things, test out different skill sets. So that's one big component. And I think going back to that piece about showing up, being able to show up as your like whole self, one of the things I think we talk a lot about at community living is flexibility, like a certain level of flexibility. And now more than ever has that been so like critical in becoming a mom and trying to balance all of those things in a leadership position. And I think community living just does such an amazing job of trying to find the ways that they can help people show up as themselves and provide a certain flexibility. And but even before I was a mom and I was going through doctor's appointments or this or that, just this flexibility of being able to kind of like do that, go to an appointment, work later into the evening, do extra hours on the weekend.
Right.
And I think now as a mom, that's really translated because you give that flexibility to somebody, they'll bring that back to you in spades. Like my ability to show up for my family and for my friends and et cetera, to be at different things when those things come up. I'm so appreciative of that. And that makes me even more motivated at work and at my job. And I
Right.
think younger generations, the pendulum's starting to swing a lot where you hear a lot about like work-life balance, but really what they mean is life and no work balance. And I think, it's true. You do need to have a certain level of work-life balance. And I have found that community living has always done an amazing job of affording me that opportunity. And I think when you can find a way to balance your interests and your passions and your life all at the same time while not getting bored. And that for me is what it has been a lot about. I've never been bored here. I've never been bored. Sometimes I'd like to maybe be a little bit more bored for a little bit, a few weeks of boredom here and there, no problem.
Not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing. So that would be, I guess, my plug to younger women.
Okay. Mita?
I agree with Deanna that don't get bored. That really is the key, that when you're keeping yourself surprised and you're keeping yourself engaged and curious, and you take that time to follow your passions within what you're already doing, and there's no room for boredom. Don't let yourself get bored.
Excellent. The Well, maybe we're getting close to time, so I'm gonna put you both on the spot a little bit. Um, in terms of there's a ton of inspirational women in society that do great things. Like it feels like there's so much opportunity. Are there women that either of you look up to, or would suggest that others look towards, that you'd take inspiration from, whether that's now or earlier in your careers, that you'd recommend people learn more about, or you want to tell about
Mita,
them?
you go first because I have someone and I'm looking up her name, the pronunciation, to make sure that I don't butcher it when I
Okay.
say it on this podcast.
Or what was a strong female influence for you during your life?
All of my heroes, sheroes, have been women who didn't get the recognition elsewhere. They're not famous people. They're the ones who do the unseen labor behind the scenes, got no recognition for it, didn't want it. They just did the work. And I always gravitated towards those women and their confidence and their strength, and they just did what needed to be done. And then they stepped back and passed the torch to somebody else and said, "Here, this is the work. Now you go do it." And they remained in the background, but they held up so much that would have collapsed without their immense presence.
Hmm.
And those are my sheroes.
I love that, Shiro.
Shiros, that's new. I
Definitely
like that.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
So one, Michelle Obama, because she's Michelle Obama. But what I love about Michelle Obama's story, which maybe a lot of people know about.
She wasn't. She's not the one you're trying to figure out how to pronounce her name,
No,
right?
no, I have the other name. I'll say
Because
because that would be embarrassing.
yeah.
What I love about Michelle Obama is that she was the first lady. But what a lot of people don't know about her, maybe they do, was that she is like a Harvard grad, a Princeton grad. She actually hired Barack at her law firm, and he was her understudy for like the longest time before Barack became Barack. And the role that she kind of played in his career, but then kind of like took this backseat to put him forward. And the way she
Right.
talks about it so eloquently, and how she talks about managing that with her family and managing career with having children. Yeah, everything about Michelle Obama for me always resonates. The other one, and I was looking up her, I know her first name, but can struggle to pronounce her last name, is Reshma Saujani. I don't know if anyone has heard of her. Also very popular, but she's out of the States, and she's the one who kind of did that quote that says, for women, we all really struggle, and the thing is around like, you can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time. And she talks about going through these phases of life where, whether it's your career now, having a family now, and how to kind of balance all of those things. She's been someone that I've really looked up to. Huge advocate in the States around paid maternity leave and things like that. So that's where she focuses a lot for work now. But she also did this talk where she was like sandwiched between like Bill Gates and a bunch of other really big people at a tech talk, and she talked about her experience as being the only woman in this like huge tech talk, and what she found. And I'll have to quote the link to that at some point, because if other people have a chance to listen to it, it's pretty awesome.
We'll put it in the
Yeah.
notes for the show so people can see it.
Yeah. Great talker, public speaker, and yeah, really resonates with young women in the workforce. So it would be a good one to connect to this for sure.
Okay, excellent.
Cool.
Thank you both for doing this. I really appreciate you being so open and honest with this. Learned about a lot from both of you, myself, and I'm sure people listening did as well. We're lucky, both at Community Living Toronto, but just in broadly a society, to have women like the two of you, you both, and then throughout the sector that contribute and keep things going. You're you're the majority of the population, and you keep things rolling. So I really appreciate your feedback, comments, and the conversation we've had. I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening, watching, and sharing. We release a new episode of Community Chats on the 15th and the 30th of each month. So don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date.